Hello, everybody, and welcome to the pre-show for Monster Monday. I am DM Galabond, and this is a pre-show for Monster Monday on November 1st, 2021. Tonight we have a real treat. We are talking about Greatwyrm Dragons. These are creatures that have been in previous editions of D&D, and they're being introduced for the first time to 5th edition with a brand new Fizban's Treasury of Dragons that came out last week. They've got a couple of really cool new features, and it gives us some hints about things to come, I believe. So, enjoy this music, which is from Syrinscape. And you can find all of the Syrinscape music over at Syrinscape.com. It is a great little package that has ambient sounds for all of your tabletop fantasy RPGs, sci-fi RPGs, all that kind of stuff. And you can also use them in your live streams and in your tabletop or your videos that you create about your games. So, also want to remind you to go and check out Mo over at the Tabletop Bellhop. If you need anything related to tabletop games, Mo is the OG. Card games, board games, party games, classic games, tabletop RPGs, you mention it, you name it, Mo has everything you can think about. News, reviews, upcoming games, rules discussions, and then a whole galaxy of people making content about it. So, we will get started in about a minute. All right, welcome everybody to Monster Monday. My name is DM Galabond, and this is Monster Monday for November 1st, 2021. And today, on a very special Monster Monday, we are digging into the brand new book that just dropped from Wizards of the Coast for D&D. That is, of course, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And we are going to be talking about a creature that is making its first appearance from 5e in this source book. That is the Greatwyrm Dragons. Now, Greatwyrm Dragons have been around in previous editions of D&D. But you may have never faced them before, and you may not have ever used them before in a campaign if you're a DM, because quite frankly, they're just like overpowered. We're going to talk a little bit about these monsters, how you might use them, a couple of different ideas, and then some of the cool features that are brand new in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons that give us hints about more things to come beyond just dragons as we get to the very mature phase of 5th edition D&D, and it sort of sets itself up for what 5.5e is going to be, and maybe foreshadows a little bit about what 6th edition is going to be down the road. Alright, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into our discussion of the Greatwyrms. Alright, tonight all of the images are taken out of the brand new source book. They're all from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And here on this on this slide, we are seeing the Amethyst Dragon. Because the Gemstone Dragons, for those folks who remember, wasn't there more than just metallic and chromatic in D&D? Yes, there were. There were Gemstone Dragons, and those are returning with Fizbins. So, let's talk about the description of the monster. And as we always do, we will start with their first appearance and work forward. So, Greatwyrm Dragons first appeared in 2nd edition, and it tells us in 2nd edition the scales of a chromatic dragon are often a brilliant and vivid color when the dragon is a hatchling. As they age, the scales grow thicker and duller to better help the dragon camouflage itself in its favorite habitat. And by the time a chromatic dragon becomes a Greatwyrm, its scales are crusty, faded, and muted. This makes the monster look slow and weak. But anyone who's foolish enough to believe their eyes is making the last mistake in this life that they will ever make. Alright, and then in 3rd edition, we learn that the scales of a metallic dragon are a dull primary color as a wormling, with mere flecks of their future metallic color showing. As the dragon ages, the metallic flecks grow to cover the entirety of each scale until the dragon appears as if it were formed from plates or carved from a single block of its metallic nature. Once a metallic dragon becomes a Greatwyrm, its scales are burnished and tinged with highlights of lightly oxidized metal, giving it an ancient and regal look. And then in 5th edition, the Gem Greatwyrm's ascension transforms their bodies to appear as crystal, their scales sparkling like diamonds. Their breath weapons become powerful waves of crushing force that can stop almost any creature in its tracks. And because, yes, the power source for Gemstone Dragons is different, and we're going to be digging more into what that's all about tomorrow night. Yes, I know I said that last week I was going to do my first impressions of Fizbins, but I had a technical issue on Tuesday that prevented me from doing it, and then a scheduling conflict on Wednesday that prevented me from doing it. So we're going to reset and try to do my first impression video tomorrow night. So we'll get more into talking about Gemstone Dragons and their breath weapons then. Alright, now this is an image from Fizbins of the Crystal Dragon. Alright, and we talk about Gemstone or Greatwyrm lore, and in this particular instance when we talk about lore, we go from the most current edition back to the earliest. So, when talking about chromatic dragons, the most ancient chromatic dragons who have survived over 1,200 years of mortal life and acquired vast hoards worth millions of gold pieces can achieve a form of apotheosis, reaching a level of power approaching that of Tiamat's mighty aspect. The competitive avarice of dragonkind and the interference of adventurers prevent most dragons from attaining this level of power. But a chromatic dragon who can outwit all rivals and overcome all potential thieves can rise to become one of the mightiest of dragons. That's from 5th edition. And then from 3rd edition, as they age, the scales of gem dragons actually take on properties of real gems because of the dragon's diet and can be valuable to collectors. In addition, the scales of gem dragons are reputed to have magical properties, or at least lend themselves to certain kinds of enchantments. So, Gem Greatwyrms in 3rd edition actually have effectively magical armor with their scales. And then back in 2nd edition, we learn about the Greatwyrms. Metallic dragons prefer conversation to combat, especially against non-evil and intelligent opponents. While this is driven by an innate curiosity, and the social nature of metallic dragons, the Greatwyrms also believe that their sheer size can intimidate opponents into withdrawing without the need for violent conflict. And that's usually the case, as we're going to see when we start digging into the mechanics of Greatwyrm Dragons. Now, this is an image from Fizban's of the Deep Dragon, which is a dragon that is native to the Underdark. And wouldn't you know it, with the creature type for these monsters are considered dragons. Who would have ever guessed? Dragons are large reptilian creatures of ancient origin and tremendous power. True dragons, including the good metallic, the neutral gemstone dragons, and the evil chromatic dragons, are highly intelligent and have innate magic. Also in the categories are distantly related to true dragons, but less powerful, less intelligent, less magical, such as wyverns and pseudo-dragons. Alright, and now we are going to go and start looking at the actual mechanical properties of dragons and Greatwyrms to be particular. But we are going to go back to an era that predates Greatwyrms and look at a unique class of creatures that, as far as I know, only ever appeared in basic D&D and then just sort of disappeared. And I think that is because of the invention of 3 specific dragon entities that came along later. But it's very interesting to go back and look at these and see how they were aligned differently than what we have come to know as the dragon deities in later editions. We have here dragon rulers. And this is from the Rule Cyclopedia, which codified all of the rules for basic D&D. And there are 4 dragon rulers. There is Pearl, the moon dragon, which is the ruler of all chaotic dragons. Then there is Opal, the sun dragon, who is the ruler of all neutral dragons. And then there is Diamond, the star dragon, which is the ruler of all lawful dragons. Now, you remember back in basic D&D, this edition was so poor. They were so poor, and you say, how poor were they? It was so poor that they only had 3 alignments. They had a chaotic alignment, a neutral alignment, and a lawful alignment. They didn't have enough money to spring for a good to evil axis of the alignments as well. It was sort of implied that chaotic is evil because, well, if you can't predict what somebody's going to do, obviously that must mean they're evil, right? Yeah, okay, whatever. And then neutral was just sort of there in the middle of things. And then lawful. Oh, lawful is good. Yeah, tell that to Asmodeus, Lord of Tyranny. Lawful can be just as evil as anything else. Alright. So then, in addition to those 3, you also had a Great One, or the Great One, which is the ruler of all dragonkind. Now, these were massive creatures with an incredible amount of armor class. Now, if you want to translate the armor class, basically a -8 armor class in basic translates to about a 28 armor class in 5th edition. And 24 hit dice with 8 asterisks would roughly translate to about a CR 28 monster. So then The Opal has a 29 armor class. Diamond would have a 30 armor class, and the Great One would have a 32 armor class with a CR 44. So the attacks and damages, each of their bite or the crush deals 68 damage for Pearl, up to 60-10 for the Great One. And then the attacks with their claws, their kicks, their wings, and their tail does 2d8 each for Pearl and 3d10 each for the Great One. And then they also have clerical and magic user spells. And note that the rulers are able to cast both clerical and magic user spells pretty efficiently. The Great One, in fact, gets 9 first-level spells, 8 second-level spells, 7 third-level spells, 6 fourth-level spells, 5 fifth-level spells, 4 sixth-level spells, and 3 seventh-level spells. That's both magic user spells and cleric spells. They're considered planar monsters of the dragon type, and they rule over various types. So Pearl rules over the chaotic dragons, black, green, red, and amber. Opal rules over neutral dragons, white, onyx, jade, and blue. And Diamond rules over lawful dragons, crystal, sapphire, ruby, and gold. And their descriptions are kind of interesting. Each dragon is bigger than the biggest gold or amber dragon in natural form. Each is over 100 feet long. Pearl has scales like mother of pearl, white but iridescent, constantly shifting like her chaotic nature. Opal has scales which are white with thousands of tiny specks of color in all the hues of the rainbow. Diamond has scales with the refractive qualities of faceted diamond. They glitter and gleam with so much reflected light that it is hard to stare at this dragon. And then the Great One has scales which glow brightly. How brightly? As brightly as the surface of a white sun. In fact, no one can stare directly at him except through a magical darkness effect. He glows so brightly that he will radiate light through magical darkness. That's how bright the Great One is. And when you look at him through a magical darkness effect, he looks like an enormous 3-headed white dragon. Now, when each ruler leaves his or her lofty plane and comes to the material plane, they're always attended by 4 of his or her largest, most powerful followers. So Pearl always is accompanied by 4 huge amber dragons, each with 176 hit points. Opal has 4 blue dragons, each with 144. Diamond always with 4 gold dragons, each with 176. And the Great One has a retinue of 12 dragons, 4 gold, 4 amber, 4 blue, all sufficiently dedicated to serving the Great One that they do not get into fights based on alignment differences. And all of those attendants are spellcasting. So if you ever encounter the Great One, you're not fighting one dragon, you're fighting the dragon ruler and probably then 12 other dragons that are at least the equivalent power of ancient dragons, if not Greatwyrms themselves. So yeah, that's why you don't mess around with these guys, and why they never get used in games, because what's the point? I mean, the only time you'd ever break one of those out as a DM is if you want to completely break the campaign. If you throw it against a party, it's like round 1 TPK. If you have it as an ally, well then why is the party even there? Because they just stand around and watch the dragon do everything. Alright, now, an interesting thing about the about their breath weapons. In this edition, these dragon rulers are able to use any breath weapon of its followers each once per day. So Opal can breathe a cone of cold like a white, a line of acid and darkness like an onyx, cloud of gas and disease like a jade, or a lightning bolt as a blue. And they get 4 breaths per day, and in this edition of the game, every time a dragon breathes, it automatically does its full current hit points and damage. So if it is, if it's a 40 hit die monster, so let's just say it's D8, so 4 times 8 is 32, so 320 hit points. So that means every time it breathes, it does 320 hit points as long as it's not injured. And then as it suffers injuries, it will do whatever its current hit point value is every time it breathes. Alright, Great One can use any breath weapon of any dragon each once per day. And then, now when you talk about their attacks, somewhere in here I saw something on their attacks. Yes. Okay, yes, they all make 9 attacks per round, except for the Great One, who makes 10 attacks per round. So the dragon is able to, these dragon rulers are able to attack up to 9 times, 2 bites every round, 2 claws every round, 2 wings every round, 2 kicks every round, and now here it's a misprint, 1 tail attack every round for the 3 normal dragon rulers. The Great One gets a 10th attack, which is a second tail attack. So that's another reason why you don't use this thing, is because it can attack 10 times every round and use its breath weapon. So, and it can cast spells. So it's like, yeah, why do you even try to fight this thing? It's an extremely overpowered. Now, I said this predates Greatwyrms. Why am I showing you this? Well, let's just say that you wanted to have a homebrew setting where everybody in your setting worships dragons. Well, this might give you a good template or an idea of how to create dragon deities. That is not simply going and, riffing off of what Tiamat is, or riffing off what Bahamut is. These are 4 different other ideas about what the dragons could be. And then, maybe within their portfolios, their worships are aligned based on whether they're chaotic, neutral, and lawful versus whether they're good and evil. So that's a possibility. So that's the reason why I threw this in there. Is I thought, okay, it might be interesting for some people that want to do something like that. But now what we're going to do is we are going to go into 2nd edition, and we are going to look at the first appearance of the Greatwyrm, as a dragon category. Now, dragons, the exact size of every dragon varies according to age and subspecies. The Greatwyrms are always around or over 100 feet in length for their body, and a dragon's wingspan is about equal to its body length, and 15 to 20% of a dragon's body length is its neck. Alright, so if we go to 2nd edition, you can see that there are actually 12 age categories. And 12 was um, 12 was a number that they used in 2nd and 3rd edition. And now I think we've gone to, what is it, 6 age categories in this edition. When adding the Greatwyrm, that's a 7th, or maybe it's, I forget exactly what we have. We have Wormling. I've got to go back and look and see what all the 5th edition ones are. Most of the time, you're dealing with young adults or adults dragons. Ancient dragons are really have always been sort of tier 4 monsters. But now with Greatwyrms, we have something even beyond those. Alright, so the categories of dragons in 2nd edition were hatchling, very young, juvenile, young adult, mature adult, old, very old, venerable, worm, and Greatwyrm. And then all of the Greatwyrms are 1200 plus years old. The hit die modifier is +8, combat modifier +12 to their attacks. The fear radius is 50 yards. So the radius of 150 feet for the fear effect from a Greatwyrm. So basically they're at the 50-yard line and everybody in both end zones of a football field is afraid of them. Fear save modifier -4. So if you're rolling to save versus fear against a Greatwyrm, you get a -4 penalty on your saving throw, just because of its sheer size and age. And now we're not going to look at all of these because they do put every single dragon into this into these categories, and you can go and find the tables on all of them. So you have part of the stat block here, and it gives you some of the base information and everything. Then you go down to the age category, and it gives you information about the size. So, for example, a black dragon, Greatwyrm, is between 96 to 105 feet long, with an additional 80 to 87 feet of tail, and then about 96 to 105 foot wingspan as well. And then dragons in this edition always have special abilities, and so they're born with an innate water breathing. The black dragons are born with an innate water breathing ability, and then at certain age categories, they get additional abilities. So when it becomes a Greatwyrm, it can cast darkness 3 times a day in a 10-foot radius per age category of the dragon. It can corrupt water once a day, and then it gets 10 cubic feet of water per age category. At old, they can do plant growth once a day. At venerable, they can summon insects once a day. And then Greatwyrms charm reptiles 3 times a day. Operates as a charm mammal spell, but is applicable only to reptiles. And then we have the blue dragons, and they're 133 to 142 feet long. The breath weapon, the lightning, is 24d8 plus 12 damage. The green dragon is 107 to 116 feet long. Its special abilities, once it gets to be a worm, it can pass without trace 3 times a day, in addition to all of the other abilities it gets. The red dragon at Venerable, it can detect gems, kind, and number in a 100-foot radius 3 times a day. It's up to 183 feet long, which is that's about the size of a jumbo jet. It is 183 feet long, with a 180-foot wingspan. 24d10 fire damage. Then the white dragon is the smallest of the worms. A Greatwyrm is only 95 to 104 feet long. And once it becomes a worm, it can do freezing fog 3 times a day, obscures vision in a 100-foot radius, and causes frost to form, creating a thin layer of glare ice on the ground and on all surfaces within the radius. So then second edition had the gem dragons in here. So we have our amethyst and our crystal dragon and the emerald dragon. And the interesting thing about this is that in addition to spells, they would also get psionic abilities. And they would be able to use psionics, which is an alternate power source to either the arcane energy used by magic users / wizards, sorcerers, warlocks, and the divine power source used by clerics and paladins and druids. I guess druids actually are more of a primordial power source. It comes from elemental power as opposed to divine power. I guess that goes back and forth really in the editions. Some editions it's like, ooh, they get their powers from the spirits of nature, and others like, nah, they just draw the power directly from the elemental forces of the planes. Okay. Also in second edition, we had some additional dragons added. We had Adamantite Dragons. So there's an Adamantite Dragon, which is a dragon that comes from the Twin Paradises. So this is a very interesting type of dragon, and a dragon that we didn't see for a long time. It's got okay, so its breath weapon has 2 breath weapons. Common breath weapon is a cone of flame, and the second breath weapon projects an area of time stop. Okay, in that anyone caught in the area must save versus spell or be affected as if by a time stop spell cast at 20th level of magic use. And then that weapon can only be used on the dragon's home plane. And then they have other spell-like abilities in addition to these wizard and priest spells that they are able to cast. So very, very powerful monsters. Now, there's another reprinting of some gem dragons here in second edition in the Fiend Folio appendix. And then there's also in the Forgotten Realms appendix for second edition, there's the Oriental Dragons. And the Oriental Dragons are very different take on dragons, and they're much more like the dragons that you see in Chinese and Asian mythology. So they look more like either flying fish monster type things, where they don't have these big wings like the classic European mythological dragons do. They have, but doesn't mean they can't fly. If they do fly, it's just sort of a supernatural ability. And so we have the river dragon, we have the earth dragon, we have the sea dragon, and we have the Coiled Dragon. So they all have these very different aspects. The Spirit Dragon, and let's see here, and then the Celestial Dragon. And I think, is that it? No. We have the Typhoon Dragon and the Carp Dragon. Okay, so yes. So all of these different Oriental Dragons, and they all have their special abilities. So let's see, what is the Divine Wind power is sort of the breath weapon that it has, and then it also has a lightning bolt capability. So very, very interesting. Very interesting take on these different dragons. And then from the Greyhawk Adventures, we get Cloud Dragons, and we get the Greyhawk Dragon, and we get the Mist Dragon, and we get the Shadow Dragon. The Shadow Dragon is something that obviously has been used, but there are all these other different kinds of dragons that some of them have not been brought back into the game, but they are out there, and they all have these different age categories, so you can create any of them as a Greatwyrm Dragon if you so desire, and if you need something that kind of looks and feels like one of these old dragons from an older edition of the game. So that's basically the second edition take on the Greatwyrm. Alright, then in third edition, we have the same 12 categories, except the names of them are slightly changed. The youngest is not the hatchling anymore. It's now called the wormling. Very young, juvenile, young adult, mature adult, old, very old. And then instead of venerable, they're now ancient, and then the worm, and finally the Greatwyrm. And these the dragons have their different attacks based on the or have the different space, reach, attacks, and damage based on their size category. Once they get to be colossal, the bite is 4d8, the claws are 4d6, each wing is 2d8, a tail slap is 4d6, the crush attack is 4d8, and a tail sweep is 2d8. And then the breath weapon is, depending on whether it's a line or it's a cone, a colossal dragon will have a breath weapon that reaches 140 feet and a cone that is 70 feet wide, as well as 70 feet long at the end of its length. Okay, now here's something that is a little bit different, and they've actually gone and made this a bit more of a I don't know if you'd say it's realistic or not. It feels a little slow to me. So Dragon Overland Flying Speed. You'll see speeds of up to 250 feet per round. And what that translates into is that a normal flying speed, that's 40 miles in an hour. Now, if you think about something as large as a dragon and it can only fly 40 miles an hour, that seems a little slow. But if it if it flies at a hustle, which means that it's basically pushing itself, then it can go 80 miles an hour. Now, to me, it seems like 80 miles an hour would be more probably realistic as a cruising speed. I mean, we're talking about fantasy flying creatures, but I'm also trying to equate them to, in my mind, to the stall speed of an airplane that is around the same size. And, 80 miles an hour seems even really slow for a big, huge airplane. So I'm thinking 80 miles an hour is probably about the minimum that you would expect for a big, huge dragon. And then in a day, they can fly 320 miles. That's either because they can fly for 8 hours at a normal clip or 4 hours at a hustle. So once again, play with the flying speeds in any addition to your preference. If you don't want to do any kind of conversions, and just go with what's in the book, but keep in mind that while the speed per round may look impressive, if you start extrapolating that out to their actual fly speed, it seems a little slow. Alright, and then once again, everything in here is all broken down by dragon type, by age category. But in 3rd edition, we now get a full stat block for everything. So for a black dragon Greatwyrm, for instance, they have a strength of 37, a dex of 10, a con of 27, intelligence of 20, wisdom of 21, and charisma of 20. Base attack, plus 37 to their attack rolls, plus 62 to their grapple checks. And then their regular full attack has a plus 46 to their attack rolls. Breath weapon is 24d4, and the save DC is 36. The Frightful Presence DC is 33. So, yes, when you get to the size of a Greatwyrm, they are incredibly powerful, regardless of what type of dragon they are. And then you also get dragon abilities by age for every dragon subtype. So this is a really cool reference if you want to use dragons in your 5e campaign and you feel like dragons are maybe a little bit, not special enough in 5e. You can always go back to these old editions and you can mine the information out of these old editions. Now this is just the plain old 3rd edition monster manual. You can get all of these resources that I use over on the DM's Guild. You just go there and buy them, and when you're buying editions from older or when you're buying source books from older editions of the game, you can usually pick them up for a fraction of what their original price was. I mean, TSR and Wizards of the Coast were famous for always selling like the hardback cover books for, $30, $40, sometimes $50. You can go and pick up a source book for 3rd edition for like anywhere between $9 and $15. And I always get the PDFs because you can search the text of the PDFs, and I can use them in my Roll20 games very easily. If I need to create a stat block for something, I can just copy and paste text and put it into a creature template, a monster character sheet if there's not one that is already available. So it makes building monsters much quicker and much easier. Alright, then in the Monster Manual 2, in 3rd edition, they released the Gem Dragons. And so, I should say for our chromatic and metallic We had black dragons. This is all in 3rd edition. Then you have blue dragons. Then you have the green dragon, a red dragon, and the white dragon. And I think that's... yeah, and then for the metallics, you have the brass dragon, the bronze dragon, the copper dragon, the gold dragon, and the silver dragon. And then by this time, you had the idea that Tiamat and Bahamut were around as dragon deities. And I think maybe even by 2nd edition. No, even by 1st edition. Because in the Deities and Demigods book, for non-human deities, they had... so that was AD&D 1st edition. They introduced Bahamut and Tiamat as deities in that particular book. So that's why you didn't see these dragon rulers anymore that we saw from Basic Edition, because they had been supplanted by Bahamut and Tiamat. And then there's also a dragon that is very seldomly talked about, and I don't know if he ever has a stat block in any of the source books that I found. I don't think I ever found a stat block for him, but there's supposed to be a gem dragon equivalent of Bahamut and Tiamat that's called Saridor. And Saridor is actually a dragon that appears not on screen but off screen and is an influence on one of the characters in my Sunday Planeswalking game. But the lore that the player and I created for Saridor is based on research we were able to do into older editions of the game. Now, Fizban's has come along and changed, making our lore non-canon for 5e, but you guys know me. Rules are a suggestion. So, you do what you want to, you do what works at your table, just like I'm doing at mine. So if you want the 5e lore, there is actually 5e lore for Saridor in the new book, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But there is no stat block because of that lore. So that's the only spoiler I'm going to give you on that. So now we have, in 3rd edition, in the Monster Manual 2, we get the Gem Dragons. And the Gem Dragons have the psionics. They all have psionic abilities, and then when using the Psionics Handbook, treat a Gem Dragon spell resistance as power resistance. So there is a whole separate source book for that. But in terms of Gem Dragons, in 3rd edition, we have the Amethyst Dragon. We have the Amethyst Dragon. We have the Crystal Dragon. We have the Emerald Dragon. We have the Sapphire Dragon. And then we have the Topaz Dragon. So, and it's very interesting the way they did these. There were 5 chromatic dragons, 5 metallic dragons, and 5 gem dragons in the main source books. And then they sort of started to tack on more and more as each edition got older and older. So then in the Monsters of Faerun, we get a few more dragons. we get a brown dragon, which is actually a dragon that has vestigial wings and does not fly. At least not fly in the same way that another dragon does. Then we have the deep dragon, which is the dragon from the Underdark. Then we have a fang dragon. And the fang dragon, these are they're called that because of the projecting spurs at limb joints and in long forked tails with a pair of scythe-like bone blades. Then you have also the shadow dragon. And let's see, and then you have the song dragon. So song dragons are so you have song dragons, which are and their weapon is a cone of electrically charged gas, and they freely use the ability like a polymorph self spell, and they always assume a human female form. Okay, so they kind of give the impression that these are perhaps something like a siren. All right, then we just very interesting. We have Dragonborn that appeared in 4th edition, but in 3rd edition there was Dragonkin, which is something that has not come up to 5th edition at this time. I don't believe. I don't think Dragonkin are in Fizbins. They might be. We'll find out tomorrow when we talk about this. All right, so now let's take a look at Greatwyrms in 5th edition. And Greatwyrms are really cool. They give us a couple of ideas of where they are headed when it comes to the tier that is beyond level 20. Now, in most of the other games or versions of D&D, when you get up to the highest tier of the game or beyond the highest tier of the game, you think of either like the immortal tier or the epic tier or something like that. But it looks like what they're going for in 5th edition, it looks like they're going probably for something called the mythic tier. And that's because of some properties we're going to see in the Greatwyrms here in Fizbins. Alright, so a Chromatic Greatwyrm is a gargantuan dragon with armor class 22 and 533 plus hit points. Why the plus? We'll find out in a moment. Based on what kind of Chromatic Greatwyrm they are immune, of course, to their own breath weapon type. They're also immune to being charmed, frightened, poison, and they have true sight out to 120 feet. They are a challenge rating of 27 and a proficiency bonus of +8. Now, Chromatic Awakening. This is an important feature. Something brand new in Fizbins. If the Greatwyrm would be reduced to 0 hit points, its current hit point total is instead reset to 425 hit points. So it doesn't have 533 hit points. It has 533 plus another 425 hit points because it goes into its mythic form. You kill it the first time, and now you gotta fight the boss in its alternate form. So it recharges its breath weapon, and it regains any expended uses of legendary resistance. So it gets all of its legendary resistance all over again. And then it can now use the options in the mythic action for 1 hour. So it still keeps its legendary actions, but it now also gains mythic actions. And notice that the Greatwyrm gets legendary resistance 4 times a day, not 3 times a day like ancient dragons do. Its attacks are bite and claw attacks. Bite is plus 18. And then it deals piercing and force damage. The claw attacks are 2d8 plus 10 slashing damage, and it can also grapple. So the tail is plus 18 to attack, and it deals 2d8 plus 10 damage. And the breath weapon is a cone that is 300 feet long and 300 feet wide at the end. So it's as long as a football field, and at the end it's as wide as a football field as long as well. So it exhales a blast of energy in a 300-foot cone. Each creature must make a DC 26 Dex save or take 12d12 damage of a type determined by the Greatwyrm's kind. Acid for black, cold for white, fire for red, lightning for blue, or poison for green. And notice that, yes, even the lightning and the acid is a cone, not a line. So it's like basically a big cloud of supercharged lightning that affects everything in that area. It gets 3 legendary actions per round. It can attack, it can do a wing attack, or it can cast Arcane Spear. Creates 4 spears of magical force. Each spear hits a creature of the Greatwyrm's choice within 120 feet, dealing 1d8 plus 8 force damage, and then it disappears. Notice there's no attack roll. It's an automatic hit. This is the Greatwyrm's version of Magic Missile. Oh, do you want to shoot me with little glowing darts? I'm going to shoot you with magical spears. So then the mythic actions it gets, it can also then do a bite attack and chromatic flare. Greatwyrm flares with elemental energy. Each creature in a 60-foot radius sphere centered on the Greatwyrm succeeds in a DC 26 or takes 5d8 damage of the type determined by its kind. Now notice here in this image, and I'm going to enlarge this image so you guys can see it. The Greatwyrm, it seems to have, at least visually in its representation, part of its skin seems to be replaced by the elemental energy that is associated with its breath weapon. So this fire Greatwyrm, basically the membrane covering its wings is not skin, but it's burning flame. And down its gullet, along its neck, and sort of through its physical form, there's just this boiling flame that is constantly there. Now, it doesn't say that you take heat damage from being in contact with the dragon, but it would make sense from the way that they have depicted it here, that either this is a representation of something that happens when it goes into its chromatic flare, or it just is always sort of has this fire, and as a DM you could feel free to punish people with heat damage anytime they get too close to one of these creatures, or whatever the appropriate thing, acid if it's black, or cold damage if it's white, electrical damage if it's blue, or poison damage if it's green. Then we look at the Gem Greatwyrm. Wait a second. I forgot to tell you something. All right. How does a dragon become a Greatwyrm, you may ask? That's a good question, and they tell us in here. Fizban's has a section where it talks about how as dragons age and get to their 1200th year of life, they become aware that every dragon has reflections or echoes of itself that are on multiple dimensions. And so the transformation of going from an ancient dragon to a Greatwyrm involves a way of consolidating and merging the power of all of these reflections of these ancient dragons. And depending on the type of dragon, that can either mean going around and literally hunting down and destroying its other reflections, and then sort of like the old Highlander movie in the 1980s, absorbing the power of that reflection into itself and gaining even more power. Or in the case of some of them, it's sort of a merging of that power that allows it awareness and presence across all of these planes of existence simultaneously. So, for instance, with the Chromatic Greatwyrm's ascension involves fusing the power of a single dragon's echoes across different worlds of the material plane. The Black Greatwyrm Chronopsis, for example, is said to have stalked multiple worlds and devoured many of his echoes before withdrawing to a planar layer in the Outlands. And the Red Greatwyrm Chardalon worked with a Balor to ritually drain the power of his echoes, then infuse their power into himself by implanting the Balor where his heart had been. So he basically steeps this demon in the power of his own echoes, and then just replaces his own heart with this demon. That's hardcore. That is a really mean, angry, terrifying dragon that can do something like that. So, and that's what these Greatwyrms are supposed to be. They're supposed to be something that just makes your level 20 badass party look at it and go, ah, crap. Well, boys, I guess this is where our adventure ends. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Gem Greatwyrm. So more than the chromatic and metallic kin, gem dragons are fascinated with cultivating their dragon sight and fusing the awareness of their echoes across the material plane. Some of them believe that by doing so they are taking steps towards reuniting the shattered consciousness of Saridor the Ruby Dragon, and they pursue this awakening as an act of near-religious devotion. Others seek to exploit their knowledge of the many worlds of the material plane as a source of power, and indeed a gem dragon that becomes a Greatwyrm has access to almost unimaginable power. And their ascension transforms their bodies to appear as crystal, their scales sparkling like diamonds. Breath weapons become powerful waves of crushing force. And there are 5 Greatwyrms that call themselves the Thanes of Saridor and believe themselves responsible for preserving the memory of their long-lost progenitor. Now, in 5th edition, as we'll look at tomorrow in our special stream on Fizban's, it said that Saridor was destroyed and shattered into 10,000 ruby shards. And the Gem Dragons, or these Thanes of the Gem Dragons, are trying to reassemble and refuse the shards from across the multiverse and bring Saridor back to life. But officially, by the lore of 5e,
Saridor does not exist as an entity at this time. So, Gem Greatwyrms, again, 507 hit points plus 400 hit points from the Gem Awakening. They have a legendary resistance. Their breath weapon is a 300-foot cone, once again. And the breath weapon is, let's see, DC 25. So the, what is the various types here? It's just force damage. So it's 11d12 force damage from the breath weapon. Now, mass telekinesis. Gem Awakening only recharges after a short or long rest. Targets any number of creatures and objects it can see within 120 feet. No one target can weigh more than 400 or 4,000 pounds. And objects can't be targeted if they're being worn or carried. So, yeah, it can pick up all those Toyotas. You can pick up every Toyota it can see within 120 feet using this mass telekinesis. And then it can repeat the saving throw, and it can move each creature up to 60 feet in any direction, but not beyond 120 feet. Choose any number of creatures and deal 7d12 force damage to each of them. So then the spell casting is Psionics, powered by Psionics, and it gets one of each of Dispel Magic, Force Cage, Plane Shift, Reverse Gravity, and Time Stop. And then Psychic Step, it teleports to an unoccupied space it can see within 60 feet. The legendary actions include a Psychic Beam. Emits a beam of psychic energy in a 90-foot line, 10 feet wide, and anything hit by it needs to make a DC 26 intelligence save or take 5d10 psychic damage. So that is the Gem Greatwyrms. And then the Metallic Greatwyrms. So, some of the oldest and wisest metallic dragons undergo a miraculous metamorphosis to become Greatwyrms. Transformation is often wrought by a Bahamut who takes pride in elevating his worthiest children to a status approaching his own greatness. And Greatwyrms transformation often involves fusing the consciousness, magic, and sometimes even physical forms of multiple echoes of the same dragon across the many worlds of the material plane. And then Metallic Greatwyrms are among the largest creatures in the multiverse, overshadowing most other dragons. Then Metallic Greatwyrm has an armor class of 22, 565 hit points plus 450 hit points after using the Metallic Awakening. Legendary resistance 4 times per day. They don't require food or drink. And actually, all the Greatwyrms don't require food or drink because they are sustained by their treasure hoard. Attack plus 18, 2d10 plus 10 damage from the bite, 2d8 plus 10 damage from the claws, 2d10 plus 10 damage from the tail, and the elemental breath. So again, 300-foot cone, DC 25 dex save, or take 13d12 damage. Acid for copper, cold for silver, fire for brass or gold, lightning for bronze. Sapping breath, it exhales a 300-foot cone. Each creature must make a DC 25 con save, or it falls unconscious for a minute. And then change shape, magically transforms into creatures medium or small, retaining its game statistics. Then legendary actions include the claw or tail attack and the wing attack. And then the mythic actions include include getting a bite and a shattering roar. Greatwyrm unleashes a magical roar. Each creature in 120-foot radius sphere must succeed on DC 26 con save or take 3d12 thunder damage and be incapacitated until the end of its next turn. So, yes, it's these are very, very, very powerful monsters. Challenge rating for the Chromatic Greatwyrm is 27, for the Gem Greatwyrm is 26, and for the Metallic Greatwyrm is 28. So, they are incredibly powerful creatures indeed. Alright, now we're going to go back and we're going to look at... let's see, we're going to go back and look at our slides again. Now, how would you use a Greatwyrm in encounters? Well, basically if you're operating in Tier 1 through Tier 4, you would. Not unless you're signaling to your players that you just want to end the game. So, Metallic Greatwyrms are CR 28, making them next to impossible to defeat for any adventuring party alone. Even for a level 20 party, it's a deadly encounter, and they look at each other and they say, we're going to need a bigger boat. This is an image of the Emerald Dragon from Fizban's. So, at the present time, if you're operating in Tier 1 through Tier 4, I just would not have a Greatwyrm appear as a combatant in an encounter at all, because it just is going to so totally unbalance the game. And if two Greatwyrms are fighting against each other, well, with so many attacks every round, it's going to be a lot of the players just sitting around watching you roll dice against yourself, and that's not going to be as much fun for them, because it turns them into spectators instead of participants. Alright, now, if you are a player and you do have that kind of sadistic DM that decides they're going to throw a Greatwyrm at you anyway, what are some tactics you can do to fight against them? So, number one tactic, don't bring your friends, bring an army. By their nature, Greatwyrms are far more powerful than a single dragon. Become Greatwyrms who manage a godlike feat of locating and combining the power of their own reflections across many planes. So they have the power of multiple ancient dragons within them at all times. They hit harder with their attacks, affect a greater area with their breath weapons and fear auras, and they are much, much harder to kill than even an ancient dragon. And just like Obi-Wan Kenobi promised Darth Vader, "If you strike me down," the Greatwyrm says, "I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine." So, yes. If you're faced with a Greatwyrm, try not to fight it. If you have to fight it, throw a whole freaking army at it before you engage it, and hopefully they've done some damage to it by the time you get there. Alright, this is an image of the Moonstone Dragon from Fizban's. Alright, now, if you're a DM, and if you absolutely positively must use a Greatwyrm in a campaign, how are you going to do it? My opinion, a Greatwyrm should be considered the capstone boss of a campaign. It's a legendary monster in its intelligence, its power, wealth, and influence. It's likely to be the closest thing to a god that your PCs will ever confront in their adventures. So Greatwyrms in 5e's are imagined as creatures that span planes in the multiverse, where an ancient dragon has somehow combined the power of various reflections of itself from different dimensions to create a being with awareness and supernatural ability to affect conditions across many planes simultaneously. So these are creatures with the power to make demigods and demon princes reconsider before they attack. So if a party is going to have any dealings with a Greatwyrm, they should always encounter it first through distant minions, whether the immense power of the Greatwyrm be friend or foe. So if the party is allied with a Greatwyrm, consider the dragon would use the party as pawns from a long distance, having a general relay a command to a major, to a captain, to a lieutenant, to a mere sergeant, who may interact directly with the party at first. And then as the party gains power and grows in reputation and influence, they would interact with those people in the organization or in the influence of the dragon that are higher and higher up the chain and closer to the actual Greatwyrm itself. And only perhaps in the final battle of the campaign may they witness their longtime benefactor. Right? And a similar tactic should be used if your party's ultimate foe or the puppet master of their ultimate foe is a Greatwyrm. At low levels, face off against pawns of low-level functionaries loyal to the dragon and work their way up the ladder, facing ever more powerful followers before being involved in an epic final confrontation that includes the party and the Greatwyrm on opposite sides of the field of battle. And again, with the sheer power and size of a dragon like this, if it's going to be a foe, your party should never be fighting it alone. You should always be an army. And I like, and I've seen, there are some game systems that lend themselves to like these mass combat situations where a player, instead of controlling a single character, a player gets to control like a whole battalion or a whole army. And I think that setting up something like that in a showdown of the party against a Greatwyrm might be a really good idea. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we look at it in the placement of campaigns. So tier 4 and beyond, the epic levels or the mythic levels, is where you might want to consider placing a Greatwyrm if it will ever directly appear in your campaign. Alternately, as a DM, you can reconsider, or you could consider everything in the campaign to be merely in the service of 2 Greatwyrms who will never appear in the game at all. Imagine 2 Greatwyrms, a gold and a green Greatwyrm, that are playing a friendly game of chess on some far distant, removed plane of existence. The pieces on the board are the PCs and all of the allies and enemies that they will ever meet in the campaign. So starting off as pawns, the PCs may eventually survive to face and topple the enemy monarchs, but they will never see or even be able to fathom the immense power of the beings that move them and their friends and their foes as easily as small carved bits of ebony and ivory on a playing board. So that's one way you could think about using a Greatwyrm in a campaign. It is the entity beyond the perception of the PCs and all of their friends and foes that is actually putting things into motion. And from its perspective, perhaps it's just having a casual afternoon game of chess. But its casual afternoon game of chess is on a cosmic scale that is affecting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of lives across many worlds in the material plane or across even multiple planes of existence. So that might be something to think about with your the way you would place the you would place them. All right. And now let's take a look at reskinning the monster. And this, by the way, is the Topaz Dragon from Fizban's Treasury of Dragon. So the concept of powerful monsters having reflections that exist simultaneously across different dimensions is intriguing. And in the lore of D&D as a game, dragons occupy such a special place that they appear in the very name of the game itself. It's Dungeons and Dragons, after all. I mean, they're an iconic cornerstone of the game, so much so that they are the archetypal monster you think of in a D&D game. So, however, in your homebrew setting, you might consider that there are other powerful creatures or entities that may have various reflections as well. So consider, maybe in your game, the way you have it, it might be devils or demons, for instance. So think of the concept from psychology of multiple personality syndrome. Now imagine that a demon or devil has multiple reflections or personalities of itself that exist across many planes of existence. And maybe they don't even share an alignment or goals, but they are distinct and yet somehow connected entities. So if you have a demon lord that is wanting to approach kind of the power of one of these Greatwyrms, maybe think about Demogorgon. So think about how Demogorgon exists as the Demogorgon we know and loathe in the Abyss. But maybe there's a lawful good Demogorgon that exists in Mount Celestia, and a true neutral Demogorgon that exists in the plane of Earth. Now, if Demogorgon were somehow able to fuse all of those reflections of itself, not only would it have something akin to multiple personality disorder, but it would also have access to a much greater depth of power. And of course, you might want to go and figure out, okay, if it's a good version of Demogorgon, what abilities would that bring to bear that might be accessible to this this mythic version of Demogorgon. And that's the other thing, this whole concept of how the Greatwyrm Dragon has this ability. When it goes to 0, it reconstitutes with about 80% of its normal hit points, and it gains other legendary abilities. That might be something that you have with your monsters. Now, I said demons and devils, but in your game you can think of whatever it is that floats your boat. It could be elementals. It could be celestials, angels and all those other kinds of things. We talked about some celestials last week in looking at looking at last week's Monster Monday. All right, so these are all some things that you can think about in terms of reskinning the monster. All right, now let's see. I want to go ahead and take a look here. I don't think that we have any questions at this point in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead into the wrap-up, and then I will come back and check to see if we have any questions that people want to ask here. All right, this has been Monster Monday. I have been DM Galabond, and this has been Monster Monday all about the Greatwyrm. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope it's given you some good information and you have some things to think about for your own game. Now, I normally do 3 live play, actual play games every week. Right now, one of those is on hiatus for another couple of weeks because of soccer playoffs, and it will return at minimum, or at the earliest it will return on the 14th of November. And that is my Sunday afternoon game, Walker of Waterdeep, which is a Planeswalking 5th edition campaign. On Thursday nights, I have the Sword Coast Chronicles. That is a 5th edition game where we are telling a homebrew story that is woven from the story arcs of the published 5th edition campaigns. And then we have, on Saturday night, we have the Saturday Night Greyhawk campaign, which is 7:30 p.m. Every Saturday night. And that is a 2nd edition game where we are playing through the original Temple of Elemental Evil. Now, all of that is available. We simulcast those live streams on both Twitch and YouTube, so you can find them there, and all of the archives are up on YouTube. And now, this week, we are going to do the delayed First Impression stream. That'll be tomorrow night, First Impressions of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. That's going to be right here on this here channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night. And next week, in Monster Monday, we are going to be looking at a creature called the Tomb Tapper, which is a construct. And we will be looking at the Tomb Tapper and where it comes from and its kind of sort of antecedents in the lore of D&D. All right. Well, I still don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and presume that you're just too tired to ask any questions right now, because this was a lot to digest. If you have a chance, go out and pick up a copy of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. It's a really fun book. Like I said, when we talk about it tomorrow, we'll be talking about a bunch of the different options for players, for DMs, some of the new lore that they have introduced, and also dive in a little bit more into how these mythic abilities hint at where we may be going in the mythic levels of D&D, and how your ultimate boss monsters might be monsters that have a mythic form. They hinted at that D&D event last month. They hinted that in source books they're going to be reprinting and re-releasing some 5th edition monsters, and I'm guessing that some of the real high-level monsters, we're going to see them have some sort of a mythic form the way that the Greatwyrm has, so that if you get into a fight with them and they fall, they will immediately come back and be, maybe not hit point wise, but maybe in other aspects, even more powerful than the form that you just got finished fighting. So that really kind of dials up the challenge on that monster. All right. Well, that is going to do it. I hope that you all have a wonderful week. Take care, everyone. And as always, I am going to remind you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everyone.